absolute silence. The morgue corridor stretches before me, shrouded in a darkness almost tangible, as if the darkness itself had taken form and was watching me breathe. The white light from the emergency lanterns barely reaches the cold walls, where shadows dance slowly. Shadows that carry more than the mere absence of light. They seem heavy, like memories that refuse to sleep. The sound that breaks the silence is not human. It is an old clock, its deep and slow ticking marking seconds that seem too heavy to exist. Each tick falls into me like a drop of melted metal, carving a countdown I don't recognize, but that somehow includes me. I walk slowly, the heavy suit on my body, my breath controlled, although the air is too cold not to make me shiver. I have seen death up close. I have worn its calm. I have organized its arrival for many who left without warning. But even so, there is always a limit. The morgue is a place of respect, and it is also a vault of secrets. The living have theirs, and the dead have theirs too. No one dares to explain them aloud. Perhaps because the explanation doesn't fit into words. Perhaps because some secrets were made to be survived without naming them. I never thought I'd cross the gate of that place after midnight. There were whispers, discreet advice, the weary wisdom of those who work decades with what is left of us after the end. Don't go there after the 12 chimes. It's forbidden. It's dangerous. These phrases didn't come as urban legends, but as unwritten protocols. They were passed on with the same care one gives an old key. Still, that night, my curiosity overcame my fear. And honestly, I don't know if that made me brave or reckless. Something inside me needed to know what happened there, in the absence of the living, in the silence only the dead know. What is left of the world when everyone is gone? What remains when the last step echoes and the door closes? If you've ever wondered what's in the morgue after midnight, know that it is not just a cold room, it is a portal. Not a flashy portal, but a subtle boundary, like an invisible thread stretched in the dark. Crossing it is too easy. Returning, not always. Do you know the feeling? When the space feels like it's breathing heavily? When your own footsteps are heard with echoes that have no origin? When you realize that silence is not absence, but a suffocating presence that settles over your shoulders and begins to weigh like an uninvited guest? I didn't believe in these stories. I hold on to procedures, to records, to sterilized blades, to flowers arranged with symmetry. I hold on to the correct names, the rehearsed comfort, the liturgy of goodbyes. But there is a second shift in the world that does not respect forms. It was there, with the clock telling me more about myself than I dared to admit, that I understood the gravity of what I was about to do. If you are listening to me now, you may feel the same chill, or perhaps you just want to cross with me that door that, they say, should remain closed. But I warn you, what I'm about to tell is not for everyone. I cannot promise calm comfort or easy explanations. There are things that were not made to be solved. They were made to be respected, and to respect sometimes means to stay on the outside. I stopped in front of the grey gate that led to the morgue's main corridor. I touched the cold metal with the tips of my fingers. I felt the steel steal the warmth from my skin, like a reminder of what happens when we get too close to those who give nothing back. I breathed twice, the second time slower. And carefully I turned the key. The sound of the padlock was a snap in the bone of the night, and for a moment I regretted it before I even began, because there is a dark secret, a deadly warning, that doesn't sound like superstition when you feel it in your bones. Don't enter the morgue after midnight. The shadows remember those who defy them. Silence sometimes collects a toll, and the clock, when it wants to, stops measuring the time of the living and begins to measure something else. I pushed the door. It yielded with a metallic and slow sigh as if it were opening its mouth to swallow me, and as I crossed the threshold, I realized the air had changed. It wasn't just cold, it was cold with intention. The kind of cold that chooses where it lands and what it takes away when it leaves. There, with the first step, I realized that I was about to discover what I had never wanted to know. Sometimes I think everything begins with a breath. The buildings, the walls, and mine, which, even restrained, blends with the dark. And I finally understood. That night I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for the right question. The morgue is, by day, a predictable organism. The raw light reveals everything, from the washed floor to the meticulous shine of the steel. The smell is a signature made of metallic notes, chemicals, and something indescribable, which we learn to call environment. It's not beautiful, it's not ugly, it's necessary. Work happens between clear stages: receive, prepare, respect, return. Everything with care, everything with a kind of love that shows no face. But after midnight, the anatomy of the place changes. The light loses its courage and becomes a hesitant presence. The tiles, which in the morning seem clean and frank, at night acquire a sort of memory. The walls no longer just reflect what's before them, they return the feeling of what has already been. And in this silent transformation, the morgue becomes almost alive. Not with the kind of life that pulses blood, but with the life that pulses memory. And memory, you know, has a will of its own. That night, when I decided to cross the forbidden, the silence was an animal lying down, occupying everything. The low hum of the refrigeration units, the background sound that sews the place together, seemed more profound, as if the machine were breathing a heavy tide. The fluorescent lights flickered, stuttering, with intervals too short for me to get used to. Each oscillation created a new universe of shadows, and shadows, I learned, are nameless stories. I found the main gate locked, as it should have been. It wasn't just the padlock. It was a feeling of prohibition that had no origin. Something in me, accustomed to following rules, suggested backing off, turning back, keeping curiosity at bay, respecting the limits. But something else that I still couldn't name pushed silently. The key in my hand seemed heavier. I turned it carefully. The click of the metal was too sharp, as if someone had turned in the dark to listen more closely. The moment I pushed the gate, the change was physical. The air became denser, as if I had crossed a thin veil between one now and another. The silence changed texture. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was sound kept in reserve. A sound that waits. With each step, I felt something follow me. Not behind, not beside me, within me. As if the house were reading my steps, my posture, my intention. I walked down the main corridor. The sounds became sharper. Rhythmic drops of water falling into invisible puddles. Drop, pause, like a metronome forgotten by someone who no longer exists. The hum of the compressors seemed to come from under my feet, as if the building had a heart buried beneath. In some spots, I heard footsteps, not mine, which I already recognized as if they were my signature. They were others, dragged, irregular. They stopped when I stopped. Then, nothing. Anxiety squeezed my chest, but I remained functional. That's the difference between fear and those who work with the inevitable. We learn to continue even when our hands want to tremble. I remembered the faces of people I had entrusted to the care of the night. People I promised to honor, even without knowing their secrets. That memory calmed me. I wasn't there to desecrate. I was there to understand a boundary. I passed the preparation room. The instruments shone with a glow that wasn't from the light. It seemed to come from the objects themselves, as if they stored the energy of use. The cold steel tables, the sink with silent metal, the closed cabinets, everything in order, everything as I left it. Even so, the feeling was that I had arrived at an occupied house. I looked back. Nothing. I looked forward. The corridor stretched out in lines that seemed to have been pulled by an invisible weight. I knew that if I called someone by name, the sound of my voice would be an invasion. So, I stayed quiet. I let the building speak. That's when I noticed another subtle transformation. The shadows were not random. There were shapes, but not the ones that form a complete figure. They were fragments of presence, a bend of the shoulder, an outline of a hand, a curve of the jaw. As if the light were trying to gather someone who could no longer be found. This repeated attempt created an unease in me, as if I were facing an interrupted task. I stopped in front of the cold chamber. The panel, usually indifferent, seemed to watch me. The constant temperature enveloped me with the familiarity of routine, and suddenly, the longing for the ordinary struck me. I wanted it to be just another maintenance night, a checklist, a silent check. I wanted midnight to be just an hour. But it wasn't. With each step, a new question arose. Who here recognizes me? What here understands that I've crossed a door that does not belong to me? Perhaps the mistake is not entering. Perhaps the mistake is wanting to control what was never meant to be explained. When I touched the doorknob of the adjacent room, I felt the cold enter through it and rise up my arm. It wasn't a breeze, it was a contact. I slowly pulled my hand away. The metal held my skin, and for the first time that night, I felt observed from a place with no direction, a place that exists in everyone at once. Staying there alone was to dive into a solitude as intense as the fear of death itself. And yet, a thought accompanied me like a candle. I had to continue. The silence had something to say. In the hours that followed, hours that might have been minutes, perhaps a handful of extended breaths, the signs became impossible to ignore. Things began with small deviations, as if the building were testing how long I would hold on to my calm. Objects almost imperceptibly out of place. A surgical instrument, once aligned, now with the handle slightly crooked, pointing in a direction as if suggesting an exit. A sheet of paper, the one that always rests under a weight, slipping off the table by itself, crossing the air with the lightness of something pushed by invisible fingers. I fixed my eyes on the mirrored steel corridor, the repetition that should have calmed me. But shadows escaped my line of sight every time I tried to face them. They weren't complete figures. They were echoes of figures, the memory of presence without presence. Faint whispers came from the darkest corners, voices that didn't form words but tones. And tones, say more than a poorly spoken phrase. They were tones of contained threat, of ancient pleading, of secrets that never had anyone to hear them to the end. The sliding doors, locked just minutes before, creaked open by themselves, revealing a precise crack, just enough to suggest an invitation. On the other side, empty corridors, long, always larger than I remembered. The geometry of the night defies blueprints. The map is different when the clock crosses the line. The tension began to transform my sanity, not in the sense of losing my mind, but in the sense of losing my routine. Routine is a kind of faith, and faith there began to fade. More and more I asked myself, am I losing my mind? Or is this really happening? The danger wasn't in seeing too much, but in naming it wrong. I breathed deeper. I opened my small notebook, the journal I keep out of stubbornness and for salvation, and wrote it down. Wrote it down as if driving a nail to remind myself that the wood still exists. Sheet fell on its own, 0028. Surgical instrument displaced, improper angle. Door opened 5 centimeter, closed 5 centimeter. Rhythm 3 times. Voices, deep, without words. Temperature dropped 1.5 degrees. I'm not alone. During this period, an insistent noise caught my attention, like the continuous whisper of a distant conversation. Not the lively conversation of those who still interrupt each other and laugh. It was a conversation like underground water. It flows without asking, drags earth, changes the shape of roots. A mix of muffled voices that seem to emanate from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Voices from the other side of life, if there is another side, and I believe there is, but not as they promised us. At one point, the wall clock, that same one that had marked the grave countdown at the beginning, began to pulse with a wrong rhythm. It advanced 2, then went back 1. Repeated. It stopped at 12:13 for far too long, the number like a nail, holding the night in place. And in this nail, a message. Time is a version. There is another version of it somewhere. I went to the inner chapel, small, intimate, where we retreat when we need to speak quietly to absence. The bench creaked. The air was colder there, as expected, but there was something more, a fragrance almost sweet, like flowers that aren't present, like a memory that decided to perfume the room. I closed my eyes for a second and saw the face of someone I had never met. I can't explain it. It was a face built of fragmented features like the sound of voices. It had no name. It had weight. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the extinguished candle, a candle I keep by habit with no burned wick, had a singed tip, as if it had been visited by fire minutes before. I didn't touch it. I knew that fingers were tools, but also knew how to hurt. I pointed the flashlight to the ground. Footprints, No, irregular marks, as if someone had dragged the cold with their clothes. Paranoia grew, but there was discipline in me. I found myself trapped in a cycle of fear and doubt, struggling to maintain control, recording everything. It wasn't to prove anything to anyone. It was to maintain a boundary. Outside the boundary, the night swallows you. With every note, I told myself, you're still here. You still choose. On one of the counters, I heard 3 knocks. They weren't echoes, they were knocks. A pause, another knock. I thought of the number 3, the same as the clock. I thought of the insistence with which the night tries to teach us its grammar. I pointed the flashlight. Nothing moved, but I knew the building was answering. Suddenly the air grew colder, not everywhere, but in a strip, as if I had entered an invisible current of wind coming from nowhere. That's when I heard my name. Not loud, not clear, but I heard it. I know how my name sounds in the dark. It doesn't usually sound. It usually waits inside me. And, at that moment, it came from the outside. Did I try to respond? No. There are moments when answering is a double-edged sword. I took a step back and it felt like stepping back too. The corridor stretched. The light from my flashlight grew shorter. The silence entered my ears with the weight of water. And I understood that I was on the threshold. It's always a threshold. The whole building is a threshold after midnight. I didn't pray, not for lack of faith, but because there are prayers that wake what needs to sleep. Instead, I closed the notebook. I pressed my palm against the cover as one would close a small door and said silently, I listen. That was enough for the night to respond to me, and the response came in the form of presence. And then it happened. Not like in the movies, not with noise, not with theatrics. It was a dry crack that didn't match anything metallic, as if the air had cracked along a fine, irreparable line. The light from the lamps flickered one last time, a short wink without promise, and died. The morgue sank into an absolute darkness, the kind that cannot be sliced even with positive thinking. My flashlight, until then obedient, trembling, faltered. I tapped it lightly with the base of my hand, the automatic gesture of someone who trusts habits more than luck. It lit up. And even lit, it seemed shy in the face of blackness. A physical presence manifested, not a suspicion, not a shiver. Something dense, toxic, with intent, placed itself in my way. I felt it before I saw it. The pressure on my chest increased, as if someone had sat on my lungs. I felt a cold touch brush my shoulder, but not like ordinary cold, like age, like a winter that never ends, like a finger that never forgets. The contact burned and froze at the same time, leaving a trail that, I swear, follows me to this day when the night takes too long to end. The air grew heavier, as if I were breathing mud. Each breath was manual labor, a calculated effort, as if my body had to negotiate the right to stay alive. Then a whisper, not inside my head, in the space. A low sound, thick, without language, but with intent. The whisper didn't speak a sentence. It was a sentence. And the sentence was, "You have crossed the line." For an instant, the light returned in a thin blade, cutting the corridor at the end, and there stood a shadowy figure. Indistinct and tall, not like someone who had grown, but like something that had been stretched. Relentless. The eyes, if I can call them eyes, had no light. They returned nothing. They were like holes dug into the fabric of the night, empty and hungry. Hungry for what? That question hit me with silent violence. I wanted to run. I wished for my cowardice with force, but it was as if invisible threads held me by the heels. Bound to the ground, prisoner of my own body, I watched my will strain and not move a muscle. The presence didn't advance abruptly. It occupied. It was like watching the tide fill a room, slow, inexorable, in no rush, without mercy. At that instant, I knew. I had crossed a boundary. The morgue is not a place made for the living after midnight, not in the way we insist on understanding alive. It's a threshold between realities, the one measured by clocks and the one measured by those who no longer care about clocks. I had forgotten, or preferred to forget, and now forgetfulness was demanding payment. The entity, I will call it that, because the known names shrink in the face of what it was, emitted a sound that wasn't a sound, more pressure that crossed my ribs from the inside. Images exploded behind my eyes like flashes, empty rooms, crossed hands resting, faces I didn't recognize, but that recognized me, as if I were the intruder in someone else's living room, the guest who wasn't invited. I thought of something we always avoid thinking about: who guards what we store, who watches when we leave. Perhaps there are hands that care and hands that maintain, and the difference between them is a silence that I was, at last, hearing. The entity didn't come closer. It didn't need to. It was everywhere. My name again, my name crossed the air, a fragment almost inaudible, but it hooked my attention like a fishhook. It was my name, and it wasn't. It was a way to remind me of myself, and at the same time, to tell me, I know who you are. The first impulse was to respond. The second was not to provoke. I chose the second. I remembered an old hallway advice. When the night wants the last word, let it. Seconds passed as if someone were dragging furniture on the upstairs floor of time. The flashlight flickered once more. This time, I saw better. The figure had outlines that escaped, like thick smoke trying to become a person and failing. There was weight in its hands, yes, hands, as if they were touching something that wasn't there. Perhaps they had touched someone many times. Perhaps they were used to pushing away what I had just brought. My presence. Fear is an intelligent animal. It teaches you not to run when running exposes you. I stayed. No heroism, no grand words. I stayed because it was the only verb available. And standing still, I understood something else. The morgue accepted me during the day because I accepted it. After midnight, it asks for something else. It asks for retreat. It asks for reverence from a distance. It asks that we don't confuse the ability to organize death with the permission to inhabit its backstage. The presence blew one last breath into the air. It didn't move paper, didn't shake curtains. It moved what I thought I was controlling, and in this movement, it left an unspoken but absolute instruction. Go. Don't come back tonight. Don't bring your pulse to this place while I'm standing. I obeyed, not out of fear, even though I was overwhelmed by it, but out of respect. Retreating was a task like climbing. Each step toward the exit charged me with a memory, a veiled face, a whispered name, a note under a pillow, a mother without a child. I paid for each of them. And when I reached the gate, the iron felt colder. I closed it with a care I had never used before. The click of the padlock was almost a blessing. The outside received me with a different kind of silence. It was the silence that exists when things return to their proper places. I turned my back. The night of the world followed its course. And I, who always thought I knew where my role ended, learned a new edge. An edge that, if crossed, would not make me wiser. It would make me smaller. Because there are territories that, when visited, don't exalt us. They remind us that, to move forward, sometimes we must retreat. The morning after that retreat was not a rest. I slept sitting up, or rather, I blacked out like someone turning off a light by mistake and being afraid to turn it back on. The presence, even from inside my chest, still weighed. When I returned to the morgue the next night before midnight, obedient as a novice, I carried with me the mark of someone who had been introduced to something they don't control. And because of that, I was more careful than ever. I thought the story had found its ending. I thought I had understood the message. But the message has layers, and some take time to burn. My colleagues noticed my heavier silence, my shorter step. No one asked. No one asks about the night from someone who carries it in their eyes. And still, the devices, the blades, the tiles, everything looked at me as if asking, "And now?" I decided to do what I always do when I don't know what to do: prepare. I checked temperatures, reviewed locks, arranged instruments as if placing thoughts in line. And deep down I promised myself, there will be no more midnight for me in this place. Not without necessity, not without prayer. But the night chooses. And that week, a body arrived late, a case that required immediate care for a farewell the next morning. The family was small, the story simple and brutal, as these stories tend to be. I breathed, asked for permission, and entered the morgue at 11:42 p.m. I had 18 minutes until midnight. The clock and I made a silent pact. I would enter, do what I needed to do, and leave. Time, and perhaps the presence, would let me pass. The preparation began like all the others. Respect first, technique second. The body was cold, the skin carrying that stillness known only to those who no longer feel pain. I spoke the name. I always speak the name. It's a way of reminding the silence that I know there is a person here. The person did not respond. The morgue did. A cold draft crossed the room like a narrow river. I ignored it, because there's no way to warm what is not ours to warm. At 11:57 p.m., I heard the first sound. 3 knocks on the counter to the left. They weren't mine, they weren't anyone's. They were the same knocks from the other day, the same rhythm the clock insists on teaching. I looked. No one. I looked at the body. At peace. I looked at the clock. 11:58 p.m. The needle seemed heavier in the last minutes, as if midnight were a hill. I proceeded. I adjusted what needed to be adjusted. I checked what was missing. And, when I realized it, 0, 0. I was there. The pact stretched. The clock did not laugh, it simply continued. 001. The light on the ceiling flickered once, like breath that misses the beat. The presence didn't enter as it did before. It came like mist, rising from the floor, climbing the tables, flowing like a memory in slow motion. I said silently, I know. I will finish, and I will leave. I didn't come out of curiosity. I came out of obligation. 03. The air stopped, I swear. The air stopped. Breathing became an invitation for attention. My body learned to breathe underneath, as if I didn't want to raise dust. The presence came from the corridor, not as a figure, but as intent. I didn't see it, but I understood it. It placed itself between me and the door, not to trap me, to remind me. Every minute here after midnight is a loan, and every loan has interest. 0005. The flashlight, resting at a distance, turned on by itself. A perfect circle of light on the floor, far from me, like a target, like a signal. In that light, for a second, I saw footsteps. Not mine, they were lighter, smaller, like someone who never weighed much. 2 steps, 3. And they stopped there, in the circle, as if the light were a pretty trap. A blink of an eye. The footsteps vanished, like snow touched by salt. 0007. The voice. Not like the last time, which was just intention. A real voice. Deep, worn, but clear. Respect. It didn't say my name. It didn't preach. It didn't threaten. It said the exact word. I felt my back grow cold inside, as if I had pressed my spine against a mirror that doesn't reflect. I, who have often worked to restore the dignity taken abruptly by death, understood that there are dignities I must practice as well, the dignity of knowing how to leave. I will, I replied without sound, moving my lips as if I were praying. The clock, ungrateful, 008. The body, ready. My hands, calm on the outside, wandering inside. I closed my eyes for a second, not to escape, but to give thanks. I opened them. The presence took a step back that wasn't a step. It was an easing of the air. The door, silently, aligned itself with the frame, as if waiting for my passage. 010. Receding is harder than entering. My body wanted to run, and running is like hurriedly bowing your head. No. I left with the dignity one leaves a hospital room after a visit. Not turning my back completely, but also not facing it as a challenge. On the threshold, the voice, or the idea of a voice, repeated, respect. I shook my head as if promising something I could keep. I closed the door. In the external corridor, I had the impression that someone passed by my side. A faint smell of old perfume, something floral, without exaggeration, without trends, a scent that buildings keep on Sundays. I didn't look. I let it pass. And I understood that, if the world is to go on, there are combinations we need to honor. That early morning, sitting on the service entrance stairs, I cried. Not from fear, even though it was there, concentrated. I cried from relief and humility. Death has taught me many things, but that night in the morgue taught me a little more. The living survive not because they dominate the dark, but because they know how close to get without forcing an answer. Since that night and the one before, I carry a shadow within me. Not a shadow that threatens, but a shadow that remembers. There are memories that weigh like responsibilities, and sometimes it is these that keep us standing. The morgue remains where it has always been. The building follows the same layout, the rooms the same names. But for me, everything has a second layer, a silent fold where what we should not call upon often resides. My colleagues don't speak of it, not because they don't believe, maybe because they believe too much. The denials we repeat over coffee are a polite way of holding the edge of the abyss with our fingers. Avoiding talking about what happens after midnight is our way of praying without liturgy. One or another looks at me differently, as if recognizing in me the light of someone who has seen and returned. But no one asks, and I don't offer. Respect has accents. Did I return to the morgue after midnight? Yes, out of necessity. And every time I honored what I had learned. To enter is to ask for permission. To remain is to know the time of others. To leave is to give thanks. The presence, whoever, whatever it is not capricious. It is a balance, a weight on the opposite side of our own. When we fulfill what is ours, it allows. When we advance beyond what is ours, it gives back. Sometimes with gentleness, sometimes with a shock that changes the route. Sometimes I still hear my name, not always. On quieter nights when the wind doesn't visit and the machines whistle softly, I hear it as a reminder. It's not a threat, it's a counting. You are here. Remember that there is another here, parallel to yours. The generosity of presence lies in not destroying us when we forget. Ours lies in not provoking it when we don't need to. The families keep arriving, the wakes, each with its unique gravity. I welcome them with the same voice, with the same care. But inside I know, at the end of the ceremony, when the steps slow down and the embrace loses warmth, the building resumes its own breath. The flowers wilt a little more, and the silence grows back like a winter plant. It's beautiful, it's sad, it's true. What has changed in me? I walk slower, I speak quieter. I want fewer answers and more boundaries. And when an apprentice asks about the midnight myth, I don't tell a story. I give instructions. After midnight, only enter if it's absolutely necessary. If you enter, ask for permission. Do what you need to do without talking to the dark, and leave with respect. Close the door. Let the night finish what is its own. People like endings with clear keys, with monsters named, with villains defeated. I do too when I want to sleep. But here, the ending is a continuous thread, one stitch into the other, like the pages of my notebook. And I accept it, because accepting is the only way to work on the edge of the world without falling. Today, as I write, the clock reads 11:19 p.m. I won't go down. Not because I'm afraid, even though I am, but because there's no need. Respecting boundaries is a form of love we learn late, when we've already violated a few through ignorance. Soon I will turn off the lights on the upper floor, run my hand along the cold railing, and say goodnight to those who don't need to hear. But first, I wanted to leave you with this question. You who have come this far with me, crossed the corridors, felt the weight of the air, and understood what I tried to say without saying everything. If you were facing that forbidden gate after the 12 chimes, would you have the courage to enter? Or would you respect the warning and stay away? If you are still here, comment the keyword, Mortal Alert. And tell me, do you believe in places where death watches beyond what our mind can understand? Do you believe there are hours of the day when the world demands a different kind of education from us? I'm still here, between the silence and the fear, between the light that fades and the darkness that doesn't need a candle, between life and what comes after. Not as a hero. As someone who learned that, sometimes surviving is not crossing. Other times it's crossing and returning slowly, and almost always it's just knowing how to listen.